On this edition of Native Report, we learn about legendary Ojibwe leader Chief Osaugie.
We visit the St. Croix Chippewa Nation of Wisconsin to learn about their two-phase economic development project.
And we interview noted journalist Mark Trahant. We also learn what we can do to lead healthier lives and hear from our elders on this Native Report.
Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee-Mdewakanton Sioux community, the Blandin Foundation, and the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation.
Welcome to Native Report. I'm Ernie Stevens.
And I'm Rita Aspinwall. On the western shores of Lake Superior is Wisconsin Point, home in the mid-19th century to Chief Osaugie and other members of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. In 1918, the people were forced to move, and a burial ground on the point was dug up and relocated. Join us now as we learn about the legendary chief and the decision to move the graves. Ancient white pines climb skyward on Wisconsin Point. This bit of land is a sacred place for Native people who, for generations, lived and died on this plot of earth. Among them, Chief Joseph Osaugie, a respected Ojibwe leader who rose to great prominence.
He came to this area in the 1820s as a young man. He started fur trading, hunting and fishing, and he was a good provider for his family. They had gardens. He was a canoe builder. That was a family thing. Everybody, they hauled birch bark, they soaked it, they did, they had different things that they had to get, materials that they had to gather, and all the family helped gather that. And the Sioux used to be here. But then when the Ojibwe got pushed west, and so then they had many battles with the Sioux and finally pushed the Sioux to North Dakota, North and South Dakota, and lower Minnesota, I think. People would come here to fish. Nobody lived on Wisconsin Point at that point in time. There was a trail that is now called Osagi Trail that came from Connors Point, and it came all the way out to here, and that's where the traders and the missionaries and the messengers, the native messengers, would come back and forth. That was on that trail. It went all the way to Michigan at one point in time.
Relations between the native population and fur traders and settlers were for the most part peaceful. With the changing populations and as Superior continued to grow, some thought more space was needed to accommodate this growing industry of the region. In a controversial decision, an approximate 180 graves in the Ojibwe Cemetery on Wisconsin Point were moved to St. Francis Cemetery. A marker commemorates where the burial ground was once located.
This is just a marking of the old Indian cemetery. Not all the graves were moved because people are buried throughout Wisconsin Point. They're all the way from the point to the point of it, all the way back, their burial grounds. This just happened to be one that was encased in a picket fence, so it became the Indian burial ground of Wisconsin Point. The cemetery was moved in October 8th, 1918, and there was a great discussion. There was a lot of anger in that because, for many reasons. One, well, of course, these are our dead. You don't want to move your dead. And then for the second, they were having the tribes pay for the removal, which we didn't want them removed. And then they were pulling people off. They were making people move off the point, which these were their homes forever that they could remember, and then they were being forced off into the city of Superior. They moved the graves to St. Francis. They were moved on a scow.
My dad was here when they were bringing up the remains of Native people from the end of Wisconsin Point. I think U.S. Steel had intended to build a plant on Wisconsin Point, and because they had planned to do this, the Indian graves had to go. And my dad remembers there being a small boat coming up and the remains being brought here, evidence of which we see on the hillside. As he told me this, let's say he was in late middle age, as he told this story to me, he felt it was a sacrilege to do such a thing to anyone. He was troubled by it.
An interesting note to this is that an attorney by the name of James Cadigan was visited in his office by a native male prior to the removal of the graves.
John Cadigan was an attorney that took part in the litigation here. And at one point in time, a stern native Indian came into his office and proclaimed that if they put a shovel into the dirt to take away the bodies, there would be, I want to get this right, the nation visited by the most terrible fire in its history. It would be swept by the most devastating plague, and it would be plunged into the bloodiest war the world has ever known. So on October 8th, they started digging, and that is the date the Cloquet fire came. And at noon, the black clouds came over Superior, and you could see them. The next day in the newspaper, you read about the epidemic of flu that was going throughout the whole world, and then the Battle of Argonnes, which was the worst battle in the whole history of the world. So the threefold curse came true. It's a sad history, but it is a strong culture. It's a very loving culture. It's a very family-oriented culture. It's a very beautiful culture, and I'm very proud to be a part of it.
Peripheral vascular disease, or PVD, is the plugging up of blood vessels and is a major risk factor for amputations. The main cause of PVD is atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries. Most people with PVD don't have any symptoms until the disease is pretty severe. Once PVD is diagnosed, risk factor control needs to be aggressive to avoid chronic, non-healing ulcers and amputations. Death from cardiac causes is higher in patients with PVD, but it makes sense that if the blood vessels in the legs are bad, the blood vessels in the rest of the body would also have disease. There are several different scales for disease severity, and the American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association use the following divisions. Number 1, asymptomatic, with no symptoms of leg claudication. Number 2, claudication, which means inadequate blood flow during exercise, causing leg pain, discomfort, or fatigue. People with claudication usually know just how far they can walk before they get symptoms. Stopping and resting makes the symptoms go away. 3, critical limb ischemia, compromise of blood flow to the extremity, causing limb pain at rest. People in this category often have ulcers or gangrene. 4, acute limb ischemia, a sudden decrease in the blood flow that threatens limb viability. The prevalence of PVD increases with age, beginning after age 40. A test for PVD that can be done in the office is the ABI, or ankle brachial index. It compares the blood pressures in the arms to the blood pressures in the ankles. By this test, the prevalence of PVD is 1% of those 40 to 49 years old and can go to 20 to 25% in those 80 and older. Everyone with PVD needs very aggressive risk factor modification regardless of their symptoms. This includes control of blood pressure and cholesterol, a low-fat diet, increased exercise, stopping smoking, and for patients with diabetes, regular foot care exams and good diabetes control. Treatment for PVD that limits activities should start with a 12-week exercise program, and there are medicines you can discuss with your healthcare provider. For those who get acute symptoms, the treatments include thrombolytics, which are medicines that are given emergently to dissolve clots. If that doesn't work, a vascular surgeon can go into the artery with a small catheter and push a small balloon into the blockage and inflate it to push the blockage open. Sometimes a stent is put in at the same time to hold the blood vessel open. If that can't be done, the next step is surgery to bypass the blocked areas. Anyone who has had any of these procedures needs to be followed closely to make sure everything stays open and any risk factors that can be addressed are addressed. Sometimes the blood vessels are so damaged they can't be fixed, and this can result in amputations of toes, feet, and legs. As always, talk with your healthcare provider about ways to decrease risks for PVD. Non-traditional tobacco use is one of the major contributors to PVD, and there are lots of things that can be done to help you stop smoking. Remember to call an elder. They've been waiting for your call. I'm Dr. Arnie Vinio, and this is Health Matters.
The St. Croix Chippewa Indians of Wisconsin is the largest employer in Burnett County, employing more than 2,000 people in northwestern Wisconsin. The nation is currently reinvesting capital and expanding its footprint through a two-phase economic development project that is providing opportunities and hope.
It is a Thursday morning, and the St. Croix Tribal Council is in their chambers where they are receiving an update on their economic development projects. These are the St. Croix Nation's most ambitious projects to date.
Our first project is in Siren, and that's a gas station grocery store. And we're just relocating it from, we're right in Siren. And our second project is here in Hurdle. It's a gas station, casino, restaurant.
We're a scattered community, and we have 4 major communities with a distance of about 70 miles from each. We live here, and we'll always live here. Therefore, we got to be neighbor friendly. Therefore, by creating jobs for them, there's not much up here except for us. So we have to, we have to take advantage of that and create jobs for them as well.
Wisconsin State Highway 70 is a busy roadway, and especially so on the weekends. It is a popular route that Twin Cities residents follow when heading to Wisconsin lakes and cabins. This is a logical stopping point.
We're on Highway 70, a major highway in the state of Wisconsin. 40 trucks a day come through here, if not 50. And we're trying to capitalize on that. The property that we have behind us is our old property. We sell 1 million gallons of gas a year. So we kind of look at that, hey, we could do better probably. We're moving forward. And the Hurdle Express property served our tribe's purpose. We need to move and upgrade and expand to capitalize on more dollars for our tribe. So right now we're in development stage right now, brand new casino, restaurant, truck stop, full-fledged truck stop with showers, everything for truckers coming in, and 50-seat restaurant. We have the deli seating over here, which maybe 30 at the most. Now we're gonna have a full-fledged restaurant over here. Right for us, it's a step in the right direction. This community's small, and with the help of the Burnett County Board and all that, with coalition, we said we're just gonna move and develop a property. Economic growth is what we needed for Burnett County.
It was a little tough at first, the relationship from the past, greatly affected, the local residents or the local areas outside the rets. We're not going anywhere. We have to support, not just our people, many people outside. So ever since then, it's gotten much better.
I think the understanding of the Indian of sovereignty and what we possess and how we want to, how we want to put that in use that is mutually beneficial with the county. That relationship is really turned around. The recognition of us, and better understanding of it, and how we want to create economic endeavors in this county certainly been accepted, and it's acceptable by us. And I think with that partnership, I think there's a lot of things that we're going to do that we're going to support each other.
6 months prior to this meeting, the site where the casino is going up was undeveloped. The St. Croix Nation has just over 1,000 band members. but with their economic development, is a major economic force in the region.
I am very proud to be a part of this team for everything that we have done for our people, for the county. You know, it is going to benefit everybody. It's quite big, and all I can say is I'm so happy to be a part of this movement with the team, with the tribe. You know, we didn't just do it just for us, we did it for everybody in this area.
We have come a long way. This is my first term as tribal council, and it is good to sit on this team, a team that works together, that have the same goal. And I see the two projects going up, and my son and I were both going past the projects, and it was good to see, you know, two projects getting completed, and that will be done quickly. It's exciting.
And one of the philosophies we had is the future of the seventh generation, and by that, you know, we have to create our economic road so that our children and our future will live in a comfortable life. We're very dependent upon each other, and we have to depend on our community membership to really advance our people.
I was very lucky in that Lloyd Meads, my first boss for 4 years, was, at least at the outset, very liberal, very much at that time committed to tribal sovereignty and those kinds of things. And so I was lucky to have him for a boss. Even as I mentioned Tino, just for those 2 years, he was good. But then the best thing was when I went to work for Mo. You know, Mo was chairman of the full committee. Well, he was a member of the House of Representatives. He had to be, you know, know what was going on generally. He was chairman of the full committee, Interior Committee. He was chairman of the subcommittee on environment. He was a very busy man. But the one thing about Mo was that he put a lot of faith in his staffers. And I say this I don't think immodesty. I kind of ran Indian Affairs on the committee. I knew if I went to a meeting over in the Senate side, say, and sitting there with the staff, I knew if I said, Mo Udall will not accept that, even Mo didn't know a damn thing about it, I knew that he would back me. In the 12 years I worked for Mo, was it 12? 14 years I worked for Mo. I can only think of about 3 or 4 times when he ever went against my advice.
Mark Trahant is an independent journalist and a member of the faculty at the University of North Dakota. He's also been a reporter for PBS's Frontline series. Tad Johnson recently sat down with Mark to discuss his book, The Last Great Battle of the Indian Wars.
The University of Minnesota Duluth often has noted speakers and visiting guests. And today, journalist Mark Trahant is on campus to talk with students about politics, federal Indian policy, and the number of Native American candidates in the 2016 elections.
This really is an extraordinary election. When I first started the project, it really started because I wanted to keep track of the congressional candidates. But I started hearing from people saying, hey, I'm running for legislature. You're supposed to keep track of me too. And pretty soon I had 97 candidates across the country. And the quality and the depth of those candidates is really remarkable. The headline is that 7 states have a shot at parity in this election, where the population in the legislature will at least match the population in the state. In fact, Minnesota is one of them. And I think that's really remarkable. So many of these folks say, well, why run if you win? One of the rules I threw out there is you got to run to win. And once you start that process, people see you and they think, hey, I can do that, and here's what I'll do different. And you kind of build it up over time, and I think that's what happens when people venture out and run.
Mark has over 30 years of experience in journalism, editing, and reporting. His book, The Last Great Battle of the Indian Wars, tells the story about the defeat of the tribal termination policy and the beginning of tribal self-determination. Two individuals played prominent roles, Senator Henry Scoop Jackson and Forrest Girard.
Scoop Jackson was elected to Congress from the House to represent Seattle, and while he was in Congress, he started to ally himself with a lot of Democrats at the time who thought termination was a good idea, primarily because they thought it was freeing the Indians. I mean, there were really two schools for termination. One was, quote, freeing the Indians. The other school was just the absolute greed of Senator Arthur Watkins. And Scoop was more on the side of, it might be a good thing to be the natural ending of this programs. Forrest Girard grew up on the Blackfeet Reservation, a member of the tribe. His father had been a rancher, and then when the Great Depression hit, he moved into town and took a job with the tribe or the county. So he grew up in government. He, after World War II, came back, got into the GI Bill, got a college degree, got sent back to Washington to work on health issues, and then was a congressional fellow working with Senator McGovern.
It was after President Nixon returned Blue Lake to the Taos Pueblo, and after his own run for president, when Senator Jackson thought he might be on the wrong side of history. He hired Forrest to staff the Senate Indian Affairs for him. This was during the 1970s, a time that was most productive in terms of pro-tribal legislation.
The relationship between Jackson and Girard was such that in the next few years, significant pieces of legislation moved through Congress, probably the most productive era in the history of the country. And Frank Ducheneau was in the House, so they had a companion on that side. Forrest was bipartisan, so he worked with Rick Lavis and the Republicans in the Senate, and they were able to push through the Indian Finance Act was first, the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, the Indian Health Care Improvement Act, and an enormous number of specific pieces of legislation for single tribes. But it was a very productive era. The committee was moving, and they were able to work with the administration to get these things done. It's interesting that we look back now and we think of the policy pronouncement of Nixon in his 1970 message to Congress, and really did launch the self-determination, but it was Henry Jackson and Forrest Girard that put that idea into law and made it more than just an idea. One of the proposals that actually was debated early on in the Nixon administration that never went anywhere was to create an Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Indian Affairs as a policy level position. And when President Carter got elected, that came back, and Forrest was asked about it. And he said there really was a major difference between a Commissioner of Indian Affairs and a Assistant Secretary, because one could focus entirely on policy and basically think through serious policy discussions. The other ought to operate the Bureau of Indian Affairs and get down with the details and the mechanics, and that they're very two different functions. And Carter agreed to that. For the first few years, they had both an Assistant Secretary and a Commissioner of Indian Affairs. And then I think about 8 years ago, they turned it into Director of Indian Affairs for the operations job. But it continues to exist even to this day. One of the first things Forrest wanted to do with the actual Bureau of Indian Affairs was to come up with a management plan so that you could rethink how you actually operate it. So much of the BIA had been, in the days of before Self-Determination Act, were entirely the government. It ran from everything from law enforcement to child welfare. And suddenly you had tribes taking over those functions. So what then becomes the role of Bureau? And having to rethink that in the era of self-determination really began under Forrest Girard. He really defined the federal government's role and helped the government make that transition between being the all-powerful to a partner. I think people ought to know what really extraordinary people are in our history and how they were at the right place at the right time and able to do such important things. And that's what I think every student should know about these really important characters. We think about the 19th century and the really great chiefs that rose up, but we had them in the 20th century too, and they were just as significant, and we ought to know their names the same way.
For more information about Native Report or the stories we've covered, look for us on the web at nativereport.org, on Facebook, and on Twitter.
Thank you for spending this time with your friends and neighbors in Indian Country. I'm Rita Aspinwall.
And I'm Ernie Stevens. We'll see you next time on Native Report.
Rita Aspinwall is an enrolled member of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and is an ICWA social worker with Fond du Lac Social Services. Ernie Stevens is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and is a film and television producer. Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee-Mdewakanton Sioux community, the Blandin Foundation, and the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation.